Welcome to State of the State. I'm Darlene D'Arezzo, and I am in conversation with candidates for Secretary of State, Greg Amore and Pat Cortellessa. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is your first time here, correct?
It is.
Excellent. And Pat, you've been here a couple times.
Twice with State of the State.
Okay, and this is your second time running for Secretary of State?
This is my second consecutive time.
Okay. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then Greg, I'm going to have you tell the audience a little bit about yourself. This is kind of sort of a debate format. I'm not really going to run a clock. If I feel like we might need to run a clock, we will, but I want you both to have ample time to answer the questions. All right, so first, a little bit about you.
Well, again, I was born in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm a resident of Providence all my life, Rhode Island, and basically, you know, hardworking person in the security business now, but did commercial real estate for about 30 years in Providence. Before that was in the restaurant bar business, and went to school, went to college, CCRI. I did some ROTC classes at PC, and that's my education. And I enjoyed the commercial real estate business very much. I own 3 pieces of property in downtown Providence. And I enjoyed being with people, and I think that helps me get to the Secretary of State's position for, you know, why I should be running. And I also worked on a few campaigns. One was very interesting, was John McCain for president in 2008. And I got to meet Robert Mashbasher, who was the Commerce Secretary under President Bush Senior, I think, and we chatted, and he gave me some insights on that department, and you know, I like to bring that to the table for the general public in Rhode Island, and enhance their lives and the standard of living. So basically, you know, that's what it's all about.
So how do your qualifications, or how does your job history prepare you then for Secretary of State? What qualifications do you think you possess?
Being involved in commercial real estate, corporations at the Secretary of State's office is important. So you know, having a background in real estate helps you understand the corporation departments and what basically the general public's going to need from you as a Secretary of State and your staff to enhance their livelihoods and their businesses, to include building permits and you know, things like corporations and, you know, the paperwork that goes through with that, and also using that as a pulpit to help small business in Rhode Island, to help the small business community, because, you know, they have to pay fees and things. And one of my major issues there with that budget that they have there, I think it's like 16 or 17 million, I want to lower the yearly fee to open a business and to maintain a business. It's $400 a year there. I remember when I was doing it, it was like $100. So I want to get that down to like $250 and try to help the small business community grow, because it's like 85% of small business is really where it's at. So with that said, there's also 3 other departments that are pretty special. The elections, I've been involved with, you know, with the election laws for quite a while, even going back.
How so? How have you been involved?
Well, back in 1998, when I tried to run for mayor as a protest against corruption in Providence, there was a lot of good things going on with the election laws getting on the ballot. I was stymied from getting on the ballot, and it tweaked my interest regarding signature matching and things like that. So that's how it all started back in 1998. So that triggered it, and to go forward, when you get involved in national politics, a lot of those things kind of like intertwine, and it's all within the same, you know, package. So with that said, you know, it's very interesting. I enjoy politics, and if I'm, you know, fortunate enough to be the ultimate winner, I want to bring that to the table and enhance participation. There's also the archives department, which, you know, I'm a novice.
Yes, and we'll get to that too.
Novice historian in military form. So I think, you know, that'd be great. I get some ideas there regarding to enhance participation of the general public.
Okay, so you think I just want to sort of summarize
Sure.
your background in corporate real estate,
Yes.
and having worked at educating yourself and changing election law, and as a history buff, qualifies you for Secretary of State?
I would say so. I think that's all those issues are really where Secretary of State has an opportunity to, help the general public. So I would use all those experiences to go and apply that to the office in general.
All right,
Okay.
okay, great. So you are a public servant.
I am.
And when did you enter politics in Rhode Island?
So I was elected in 2012
Okay.
for the first time, open seat in East Providence. I was born and raised in East Providence, fourth generation townie. I'm a teacher at East Providence High School. I've been
Oh, what do you teach?
history
Okay.
at East Providence High School. For 26 years, I taught history, civics and government, advanced placement United States history. Over the past 6 years, I've become the athletic administrator for the East Providence School District. So that's a big organization. It's a $700,000 budget. It's 72 employees. It's scheduling, social media, parent communication, Special Olympics. It's a large organization. I still teach civics from time to time when there is a need in the district. As I said, I was elected in 2012 to the General Assembly. Over the course of the next 10 years, I've served in the General Assembly in many capacities. I'm the vice chair of the Education Committee. I'm a deputy majority leader. I'm the chairman of the Finance Subcommittee on Education. I served for a term as the chairman of the Small Business Committee. I've worked in a number of ways on almost every aspect of the Office of Secretary of State within the General Assembly. As small business chair, obviously I work with small businesses, especially during the pandemic where they faced tremendous challenges, and we helped get them the aid that they needed and tried to navigate state government for them during that crisis. I was the sponsor of the Civic Literacy Act, which requires every Rhode Island student to have at least one semester in civics before they graduate, improve proficiency in a project-based manner, so getting involved.
Yeah, let me just pause you there. That's fascinating. So proficiency in civics, what would that look like?
So according to this bill, what that looks like is you're engaged in a project-based scenario. So you're choosing as a student how you want to engage in local government. I'll give you an example. When I was teaching civics at East Providence High School, we were doing a unit on the criminal justice system. We learned through this unit that those in Rhode Island who were wrongly convicted and then wrongly incarcerated, when they got out, DNA evidence, someone came forward and said that they were innocent. When they got out, they had no resources. They were not compensated for the wrongful conviction. They were not given job training, nothing. My students thought that was terrible.
Outrageous, I bet,
and
yeah.
so we wrote a bill.
Yeah.
And they got involved in the process to write the bill. They did testimony. They created a piece of legislation. I'm proud to say that legislation is passed, and that's the law in Rhode Island today. If someone is wrongly convicted, if they are wrongly incarcerated, they receive compensation at $50,000 a year from the state for however many years they were wrongly incarcerated. And my students wrote that bill. That's how you would prove proficiency within a project-based civics requirement. You can do it in a whole host of ways. You can do petition of government. You can go testify on a bill at the State House. There's a whole host of ways to connect with local, state, and federal government through this legislation. So it's just been implemented across the state. I think it's an essential piece of curriculum to make sure that the next generation and the next generation of Rhode Islanders knows how their government works, knows how to access government, and understands fully what their rights are and what their role is as an American citizen.
Anything else that you want to share about yourself with the
Yeah,
audience?
I mean, I've been a long-time coach. I played baseball at Providence College, and then I went on to coach at Providence College. I went on to coach at the Naval Academy Prep School. I was the head baseball coach at LaSalle Academy at East Providence High School. I also coached hockey at East Providence. So I've spent a lot of time with young people. In my capacity as a history teacher, I organized the Project Close Up for East Providence High School. That's taking high school students to Washington, D.C. and immersing them in their government, learning hands-on, much like what we just talked about with civic literacy. I did that for 20 years. I also ran the Senate Youth Program, which is the competitive test for young men and women who want to go on to a career in government.
Okay. What do you see is the role and function of Secretary of State? Who wants to take that question first? You take it first?
I'll take it,
Okay.
I guess. Well, the role of the Secretary of State basically is the chief election official. So she has to basically he or she has to oversee the elections in general and make sure everything's on the up and up. If there's any issues, they need to, that person has the authority to rectify issues, or maybe, do it prior to it becomes a problem. So, again, the Secretary of State has to be the person in charge of several issues like lobbying. I would like to submit legislation for 1 year, a revolving door, where politicians cannot lobby
We have lobbying here, so let's
Okay.
pause and
in general.
we'll just explain to our audience who might not be familiar with what lobbying is and why it's a concern for the Secretary of State's office.
A lobbyist is someone who's paid by a private entity or private party,
Or not paid.
corporations.
They don't have to be paid.
Technically, we want to keep the inside trading, inside dealing to a minimum. And when a politician does get out of the State House, when their terms are up or they're defeated, they use their influence of meeting people as a politician, and we want to make sure that they don't use that influence to enhance a private entity in general. So that would be my concern, and that's why we'd like to have a 1 year revolving door where no politicians would be able to be an official lobbyist to enhance a private entity that they might have contacted or became friends with.
Okay.
Very important.
Okay. So elections lobbying, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean,
For
the Secretary of State is the record keeper for the state, right? So public information is stored with the Secretary of State. Obviously, business registration is in the realm of the Secretary of State. Making sure those business registrations are up to date. Dissolving those business, again, Secretary of State. So you have a bunch of different silos. One of those silos is elections, but it's not the entire elections process, right? It's up until the actual election. So maintaining the voter registration rolls, making sure that the ballot is prepared correctly, civic engagement and information so that voters know where and how to vote. So that's all in that silo. Now, once election day comes, it's separated, and the Board of Elections takes the electoral process, because you do want to make sure that the political is separated from the process. We don't want a Secretary of State to put their thumb on the scale in an election. That needs to be separated. It should be separated, and it is in Rhode Island. In fact, in Rhode Island, the Board of Elections certifies elections. The Secretary of State does not, and that's wise, because the Secretary of State's name is on the ballot every 4 years. So you have civic engagement, you have the archives that you manage, you have public information that you manage. It's a big job, but I also want to stress the fact that the Secretary of State is also the public information officer for how all of these things work. So we have to very clearly communicate to the residents of Rhode Island how all of these processes work, especially voting, but all of the processes, and make sure that that's clear. You also have to maintain a really up-to-date website so that people can navigate state government, especially businesses can navigate state government, but at the same time, you have to make sure that's safe. We know that cybersecurity is a major, major concern, not only in elections, but across the board. And we have to make sure that, the Secretary of State and that entire office is performing their duties safely in an environment where technology is becoming more and more prevalent.
Do you think our elections are safe?
Yes.
You do?
I do.
Do you think that...
It's not a matter of thinking, right?
Well, do you think...
the evidence suggests that our elections are safe.
Do you think that the people of Rhode Island think that?
I do.
You do?
I do.
What do you think?
Well, I would say there's a minority of people that may not think that's true, and honestly, it's our job, whoever becomes the Secretary of State, to make them believe. And now, how do you do that? You have to go and go out of your way to make them believe by being, in the pulpit, as they say, explaining to them that the elections in Rhode Island are fair and equitable. And how do you go about doing that? You have to really go into the communities and talk to the people. I think, being from the inner cities, I've got to know a lot of people from the inner cities, and I think I have an opportunity there to get into there and get more participation in the voting concept. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of disenfranchised. Actually, myself and Greg, we have a big responsibility, because I'm at a point where I'm very concerned about the question you brought up, and I think we have to bring everybody to the table. Mm-hmm. to provide whoever's upset with the way the system might be or may not be, or mm-hmm. it's allegedly to be. We need to bring that divide together. And I'm a unifier. I'm not a divider. And I would take that responsibility on quite intensely, because it has to happen. The infighting in politics, nationwide, statewide, citywide, it's got to end.
Hold that thought,
okay.
Because I would like to ask you both how you think you could perform, or if you had a different political party in as governor. Well, we'll get to that question. But,
okay.
But Greg, from your website, I have a quote. It says, "We are seeing record low levels of trust in our government and widespread belief that our elections are neither free nor fair. These trends continue to be a risk to our democracy, and I take seriously the need to build trust in the community regardless of who wins any particular contest."
Yeah, right. I think no one can really disagree with that. And what Pat said, I would agree with, in that the role of the Secretary of State is to make sure that people know the facts, to make sure that we go to where people are, and that we don't speak down to people, we speak to people. And we deal with their concerns. So if they have a concern about voter fraud, we explain with evidence.
Yeah, but why do you think that there is
we know why.
Widespread belief?
The former president has said that the election was stolen. Mm-hmm. He has a vast number of followers. There's at least 35% of Americans who absolutely believe that the last election was stolen, and that's because he has said it, and he had the greatest bully pulpit that he could have. And so this is it's referred to as the big lie. This is something that he has perpetuated. Now that's the reason for the lack of confidence in the system. What we have to do as elected officials, as public officers, is push back on that with facts and talk about the 60+ court cases that have been dismissed. Talk about the attorney general who worked for the president's appointee, who said there was no widespread voter fraud. Talk about the Department of Homeland Security appointment, who was his appointee, who said it was the safest election in modern history. We have to push back on that, because the most dangerous thing we face is a lack of confidence in our democracy. If we continually have a situation...
Do you think we have a democracy or a republic?
Well, we have a republic, but the voting process is democratic. We have a democratic republic, but the voting process is democracy, one man, one vote. We have to push. That's as Lincoln said, we can only be defeated by ourselves, and we can be defeated if we do not accept the results of election. If my side doesn't win and I don't accept that, we don't have a democracy. We don't have a republic. Our nation cannot exist. And so we have to make sure that we're laying the facts out, so that when someone questions whether or not the presidency was stolen, we can say, well, how can a presidency be stolen if down ballot Republicans won on the exact same ballot that the number one Republican on the ballot lost on? That's an impossibility. It's a statistical impossibility. It's a practical impossibility. And we don't talk about that enough. And I think we have to really lay that out to let people know that, yeah, there are stewards of elections. They're doing their job. And we have to make sure that our democracy survives. And the only way it survives is if we have continuous transition of power and the other side accepting the results of an election.
Did you want to say, so would you say down?
Down ballot. So the U.S. Senate candidate won on the same ballot that Trump lost. That's an impossibility for the election to have been stolen from the president if a U.S. senator on the same ballot won, but the president lost. there's no logic.
Do you want to comment on
Sure.
what Greg said? Okay.
Well, I think, this is just not from 2020. Go back to 2016. The Democratic nominee, she claimed there was fraud, election, mismanagement, or
Who was that? Refresh my memory.
President-elect, the candidate Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
It's out there that she basically said that her election was stolen. President Trump had Russian connections. The dossier is completely bogus. And
But she conceded the election, and she showed up to the inauguration. She conceded the election.
Okay, if I think that's correct. But she did publicly say
She said there was influence, yes.
influence, and she was stolen from her. And you had Tracy Abrams a couple years back also claimed that her election for governor in Georgia was stolen.
Who also conceded the election.
So the bottom line is,
Right, but if our politicians that are running have doubts,
Right.
how do the people then
and those,
have
those are two completely different cases, right? Hillary Clinton was talking about Russian outside influence, right? That impacted her election. I think Stacey Abrams was talking about voter suppression. Either way, the election process itself, both of those candidates accepted the results of the election process. What they were saying is outside influences may have turned that election one way or the other.
which did not happen.
Right? Okay, so that's what they were claiming.
Stacey Abrams' lawsuit was thrown out.
Yeah, they lost, and they admitted they lost. That's the big difference, right?
And-
the big difference is this president, the last president, has not admitted that he had lost, and he's created a narrative that's false around the process. I don't disagree with Pat that both of those candidates claimed one thing or the other. I happen to disagree with Mrs. Clinton. I don't think she ran a great campaign, and that's probably why she lost. But the bottom line is both conceded, and both said, yes, I am not the elected official in this position. In fact, Mrs. Clinton gave a concession speech and again showed up to the next inauguration. That's the danger, is when we don't accept the results of an election. We can say what we want, and people say what they want all the time, but you have to at some point accept the results and move on.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I think it's time to move on. I think it's
Move
time.
on from this question, or move on from that?
I think it's time to move on and get into the candidates, and hopefully people will accept the figures, and hopefully the signature issue was the major issue with the pandemic, and I think that's why President Trump was upset, because he felt that some of the signature requirements and verifications were suspect. And I'm not defending that position. I just want the public to know that he had, his issues too. So again, here we are, 2022, and we need to, go on to the next new elections, and hopefully provide the general public with voter integrity.
Okay.
And we've had a Secretary of State in Rhode Island that basically, in a primary, closed down 33% of the polling locations for Mrs. Clinton against Bernie Sanders in a primary in 2016. I would never do that for any favoritism to help a candidate out, and I don't think we have the time to get
Would
into
you, Greg?
Well, I don't think the Secretary of State has that power. Those local canvassing authorities decide which of the polling locations are going to be open. So that
Down south, this is a major issue.
you were talking about Rhode Island.
That's true.
Yeah.
But down south, those issues are used, and those excuses are used exactly to keep voter suppression down by closing up a lot of the polling locations. So my question would be, if I'm the Secretary of State, if I find out from the Board of Elections if they had that philosophy going, no way. You got to keep those polling locations. I don't want to hear about financial issues. I got a $17 million
And you have power
budget.
to do that as Secretary of State.
Absolutely. I would never
You
have that on my watch.
You have influence on the process, but the local canvassing authorities determine which of the polling locations are open.
Or the Board of Elections.
Okay.
And you are the remember, the Secretary of State is the chief the chief election official. So she has ultimately authority. She could put, or he could put that influence on the Board of Elections.
There's a collaboration that goes on between the canvassing authorities, the Department of State, and the Board of Elections. But in regard to polling locations, that collaboration goes on between the Department of State and the local canvassers, and they try to make a determination as to what the turnout is going to be, and how many polling locations need to be open. And so there is influence there. At the end of the day, the local canvassing authority determines which polling places are open, based on information that they have from the Department of State, and their own information.
Well, using that philosophy, thinking that you had a presidential primary in 2016 against Senator Sanders against Mrs. Clinton, you would think that would be a high priority. So I'm not sure what happened back then, but hopefully that'll never happen again.
So we're in voting right now, early voting.
Sure.
Wild, right?
Yes.
Do you know how you're doing, or do you want to say?
I've already voted, so I know I have at least one vote.
I'm a traditionalist.
Okay.
And I always took it upon early voting, and we had some ideas that passed across our bows, as they say, ships. But I will vote same day, the day of the election, November 8th.
Okay. So let rivote.org, right? You're familiar with this. You're very familiar with this.
I am.
How Rhode Island voted in the 2020 general election: 29% early in person, 33% mail ballot, 38% election day.
I know.
Not too many people are old school.
Well, you have to take in consideration was the pandemic, and they were pushing not to get the general public with a lot of people together. It was kind of scary. So you have to take in consideration that the public took that medical issue very seriously. It was a very serious issue. So you could see the numbers that were portrayed there. I think this year, though, it's very slow. I don't see the enthusiasm going on right now. I think the numbers are showing about 11,000 people so far between early voting.
So this is the
and
mail-in.
ballots.
Okay.
So it's not projected to be that high this time around.
Do you have any concerns about mail-in ballots?
No.
Okay.
Well, here's the major concern, and from my
And part of that answer is that we saw no concerns with it during the last election. There really, I think there were 3 total cases of fraud that are being prosecuted, and none in relationship.
You support permanently removing the witness notary requirement?
Yes.
But what might happen to voting? Like, I mean, if somebody can just mark an X and
that's a different question.
That's 2 questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Then
So
I want you to...
you want me to ask the first one
yes,
first?
please.
So the witness signatures or notary were removed by the Let Rhode Island Vote Act. In my mind, that's an anti-ballot harvesting measure. When you require 2 witnesses or a notary, you're actually putting a campaign in with a voter. That voter is requiring 2 signatures to witness. That voter is requiring a notary. Many campaigns used to hire notaries for that. You're actually putting the campaign in the room. In this case, you're voting on your own Australian ballot, which is the private ballot that we all have experienced throughout our entire history. The private ballot is made out. You sign your name. You sign the envelope. There's a barcode that tracks the ballot that's been sent to you to your name. That's a secure system. And not only that, the 2 witnesses that were signing in previous elections, no one verified those witnesses anyway. I mean, I don't know how you could verify who those folks were. There wasn't a signature verification on them. In fact, in many cases, they may not have even been Rhode Islanders.
Okay, so before we go to that next question,
well, when you remove safety precautions like the witness and the notary, what did you put in its place? So my question is, why with the $1 million machine down there to read the mail ballot signatures, which is the major issue here, you want the general public to have faith in the system. The machine has a software to be able to read the signature that matches the voter roll. It's not on. They decided to use 2 individuals to match the signature when it comes through the machine. Number one, for a candidate, they've taken away the right post-election for myself, for Greg, or anybody to go in, to sit at the table, to look at the matching signatures on the mail ballots that reflected your campaign. Quick analogy. You lost by 100 votes, and you had 101 mail ballots went against you. Well, I think as a candidate, we should have an opportunity to make sure those signatures matched the total of our tally. They've taken that away from us. We have to trust two individuals. Now, I understand they took a half-hour class on the internet by an ex-FBI agent, but they're not hand experts, number one. And there could be some kind of political favoritism or political influence there with these individuals. That's how I feel. Are they bipartisan? Are they a Republican, Democrat? Do we have that comfort level? So I don't think by taking away those safety precautions, they've addressed the issue.
So do you agree that two witnesses and a notary is not the best route, not the best way to verify the vote? But you feel like the ballot,
mail ballot.
There has to be another way.
Exactly. Do we
have
take
another
something
way?
away?
So I would agree that we should use technology where it's available, right? So if we have the software to do signature verification, which we do, I don't know at what level that is now compared to what has been developed since we bought that software, we should use it. And anybody that's toured the Board of Elections sees how the process is done, right? The signatures come up on the board. You get a signature from the envelope, a signature from the ballot, a signature from the DMV or from a state ID, and you make that comparison. And then two people, and they are supposed to be nonpartisan people, determine whether or not that signature is legitimate. If either one of them has a question, it goes to the next level of review. And that's the process. But I wouldn't disagree with Pat. I think where we can use technology, signature verification technology, we should, and many states are.
And really, the only way that the Board of Elections gives a candidate to be able to sit there and look at that is between 8 p.m. of the night of the election, when the mail ballots are starting to be fed through the machine, to probably 2 a.m. or midnight. So you would have to sit there and object to a signature that's on that mail ballot. Think about that process. That's pretty, and you probably have about 5 seconds to look when they come on the screen to object. Wait a minute, and it's not correct. It doesn't give the feeling of it's a fair shake. And by the way, this is not a Republican issue. This could be a Democratic issue in a primary.
But I think if folks experienced what that looks like in real time, I think they would feel comfortable with it. Listen, I want to use the software. I'm a big proponent of signature verification software. But I think if folks looked at the Board of Elections process and watched it go through its protocol, I think they'd be comfortable with that signature verification.
Well, also, Greg is co-signer of this Vote Rhode Island Act. I feel that the committee, had a great opportunity to put restrictions on ballot harvesters. You know, right now you could have an individual out there paid, I call them a political mercenary, a team, and they can go out and get as many mail ballots and deposit them into the Board of Elections or the drop boxes. So you could have teams of people going out there and basically getting 400 or 500 to 1,000, maybe more or less, mail ballots. And we should have put a restriction on that ballot harvesting opportunity there.
You think so?
It would have made a great difference in the bill. Yeah. It would have eliminated that issue, number one, perception, very important. And also, again, a traditionalist approach to politics, the flavor of politics, for the voters to meet the candidates at Election Day, at the polling locations, having the ballot harvesters all over the place. It's commercialized. It's become disenfranchised with the voter. They don't even know who they're voting for, basically, unless they're told to vote for a certain person out of curiosity. Who knows? But I don't feel comfortable, and my constituents don't feel comfortable the way the system is now without that protection regarding ballot harvesting. I think that's a concern.
So I think the Let Rhode Island Vote Act, in removing the witness signatures and removing the notary, goes a long way to eliminating true ballot harvesting. Because, collecting somebody's ballot that's been signed and sealed with a signature on the outside, that's basically you're a delivery system. You're delivering that to either a mailbox or a drop box or a board of canvassers, right? So the real ballot harvesting happens when the campaign gets involved in the vote. And when you're requiring 2 witnesses or you're requiring a notary, the campaign is involved in the vote, and they can get involved. They say, you need a couple of signatures here, or you need a notary. Now you're in the room with that voter. In this case, a voter has a responsibility to seal that ballot, sign that ballot, and get it mailed. If I'm going to hand my mail ballot to Pat and say, Pat, would you drop this in the mailbox on the way home? I'm trusting Pat to do that. All right, maybe I shouldn't, but it's my responsibility. I have faith in voters. I think the American people and Rhode Islanders are smart people. I think the vast majority of them take care of their own ballot, however they so choose to vote. They take care of their own ballot. There's been no evidence of this harvesting in the last election. There was no evidence of this harvesting in the last primary. I think the real harvesting is what I'm talking about, and that's putting a campaign inside a room with witnesses or a paid notary to make sure that a ballot is filled out.
Okay.
Well, in one case a few years back, there was a senator in Newport that actually had a harvester go out, and she picked up, I think, over 400 ballots. So that it does potentially, exist. And as far as voters with their mail ballot, I've known, and other people have told me, that a lot of times when the harvester gets there, it's still out of the envelope. And some of the voters, especially the elderly, they request help, And there are some laws that, the Republican Party needs to catch up to a little bit regarding participation in the elderly homes. I mean, I know there's some bylaws that Republican, Democrat has to be there to do it as a team. And I think if I'm the Secretary of State, I'm going to get on the phone talking to the Board of Elections or whoever's the responsible party to make sure you have that exposure there for each party representative to go there. Again, you got to give the general public to have faith in the system. Whatever we have to do, we must get to that point. And I know I spoke to the former co-chair of the Board of Elections, and his position was, I'm not going out of my way for anybody. They should know what's going on. I disagree because of the environment and the atmosphere. We have to go out of our way to bring everybody together, especially the young. They're watching all this. Yep. I'm sorry to say, but the Jerry Springer show has caught up to general politics. And until that's, those issues are resolved, we're not going to get to where we want to be with our democracy.
So that's a nice segue to the X question. Oh, did you want to say something else?
I think the entire conversation we're having revolves around voter access, right? Making things as easy as possible for people to engage in the democratic process. We no longer have the traditional workday. Pat's in security. There are a whole host of people, especially in Rhode Island, who are in the industry, hotel industry, restaurant industry, and their days are not 8:30 to 8 days. And so when we offer early voting, mail voting, in-person voting, either early or on the day of election, we're giving people options to get engaged in the process. And I think as Secretary of State, you should always be promoting more access and more involvement. And I think that's the conversation that we're having, only we're having it on specifics of the 3 various ways to vote.
Okay. So the X.
Yeah, the X is used for disabled voters.
Right, but how are we verifying?
There is no verification. I don't think you need to have to show a medical issue. I think it's kind of like right now, basically, if someone does sign with an X, which I don't know the number there, all I can tell you.
I don't, but if they have a signature on file, which they do because they're registered voters, so they have a signature on file, that's the signature that's going to be matched. If there's an X and that signature doesn't match, then the question starts as to whether or not they're disabled and they need that. Now, in some cases, they're marking that. We know that they're disabled. But in other cases, that's going to be a red flag signature, and people at the Board of Elections are going to have to try to cure that ballot or find out what's going on with that ballot. Maybe somebody had a stroke, and they can determine that. And then through that process, they can determine whether or not they are who they say they are. This is a very small number of people that mark an X.
And previously,
what you're saying is anyone who marks their ballot signs with an X, that is verified.
if the signature is on file, the original signature is on file, it's not going to match up with that signature. And so that's going to create a red flag at the Board of Elections. And then at that point, that person will be contacted to try to cure that ballot. Now, if they have a permanent disability, then that X is already recorded as the signature.
Okay.
Early voting, as Greg said, my only concern with early voting is buyer's remorse. And the question becomes 20 days, is that too much, too little, whatever the case may be? I had proposed 6 days to give people that do work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, they don't have an opportunity to go on that one day. Of course, we would love to have a holiday. I think Greg agrees with that. We can have, you know, a state, it's somewhat of a holiday, but it's not an official holiday. And that would really solve the problem, you know. But with that said, 20 days, I think, is a little bit too stretched out. And I think this time around, you're going to see a lot of the numbers showing not coming back the way they expected them to come back for whatever reason. Could be voter apathy, you know, just people are not tuned in, they're upset, they're frustrated, you know. The bickering, even with candidates, the bickering has to stop also, even in campaigning. Negative campaigns technically really turn people off one way or the other. And I think you're seeing it in the numbers this time around. It's really low. I was even shocked myself to see, I'm not sure how many mail ballots were officially approved, maybe under 40,000 this year. 2 years ago it was 175,000. 4 years ago it was about 80,000. So this time around, the mail ballot officially that were approved by the Secretary of State's office is way, way down. So there's something going on here. So we as, you know, the elected officials, hopefully, have to figure this out, because you know we have to make democracy work here. Okay. It's the golden government of the world. Yep. But we have to, you know, go out there and make sure it stays that way.
Yeah. Right.
But going back to the 20 days, you know, in the primary we had just now with the Democrats, especially, they had some really great candidates. One had really, you know, peaked at the end there, and unfortunately, you know, she came up short. And the mail ballot governor, company there, whatever, the individuals prevailed. And, you know, there are some people concerned that that's unfortunate, being 20 days that people have voted instead of, you know, a shorter window of time. And I'm not sure if it's even worth it. I'm hearing the Board of Elections, even some of the city halls, people are just standing around wasting financially being paid. Yeah. And it's not. The need is not there.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you short, but I think we should move on to so much else.
And I would say just quickly on the early vote, you can wait till 6 days before to vote. And as an old baseball coach, 3 runs in the first inning is the same as 3 runs in the 9th inning. Okay.
But unfortunately, at the time when you vote, you can't change your vote. It's over.
So you're
but
thinking
you could have buyer's remorse the day after you vote on election day, too. I think probably everybody at this table has had buyer's remorse on a vote that we made on election day. So the buyer's remorse argument can work not only early, but it can work late.
Right, but I think what you're saying is the more time leading up to election day, the more time there is for something to go awry. Is that
what possible, I guess. Okay. Yeah, I mean, anything can happen.
I actually think the opposite of that, and we saw it in the primary. Okay. If we didn't have early voting, they wouldn't have caught the mistake on the machine, the express vote machine for disabled voters. And if it had happened only on election day with that volume, we'd have been in deep trouble. Do
you think we need to go through and sort of mine and just make sure everyone that's registered is actually alive and well?
Yeah, the Rhode Island Vote Act does that. In fact, it increases the process to make sure that the voting rolls are checked into and audited
clean
and clean.
It all up.
Correct.
Right now we got about 805,000 potentially registered voters in Rhode Island, which is way too much. I think we got probably 200,000 extra there.
So we have 805.
That's inactive and registered. Yes.
Inactive and registered. Do you agree with that?
So I don't know if that number's still. I think it was at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't think that's accurate anymore, because I think the rolls have been cleaned based on the fact that mail ballot applications were sent out to many people who did not respond.
How many voters do you think we have in Rhode Island, registered voters?
Well, legally, there's probably, from the last number I looked at, I saw the combined registered voters of inactive and voters on the register, 805,000. Now that might have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they cleaned it up a little bit since over the last year, maybe, or 6 months. But there's different.
So that number's come down from 805.
It has. I don't know how far it's come down, but
But there's been.
All right, so we only have 15 minutes.
yeah. Okay.
No way.
It's so
It's already
yes,
that quick?
yes, we spend way too much time on.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So at the start of the show, I asked Greg and Pat to jot down a couple of questions that they would like to ask each other. So, Greg, Pat wants to know your favorite sports figure.
Joe DiMaggio.
Okay.
As an Italian American, my father talked about Joe DiMaggio all the time, and I tried to wear number 5 in youth sports as much as I could to honor the Yankee Clipper, who was a great success,
Okay.
son of Italian immigrants.
Pat, I think you've answered this, but Greg wanted to know what has motivated you to run for Secretary of State. I think you've answered
Okay.
that, right? Right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Who's your greatest political influence?
President Reagan.
Okay. What is your first priority if elected? I think we've answered that one too.
Get into the Secretary of State, roll up my sleeves, and
But first thing you're going to do
first thing I'm going to do.
after you roll up your sleeves.
Get right into the budget there and get into the election laws. I want to clean up some of the issues on how to get on the voting roll. I don't think a credit card, a gym card, a debit card should get you on the voter roll. I think, remember, we have a photo ID law. They circumvented that law by going with these mail ballots without photo ID. So think about that. That concerns me.
Okay.
But we'll work it, make it work.
Okay. So Pat asked Greg to explain your position on early voting in the 20 days we've done that. This is interesting. You've co-signed on the anti-magazine bill. So let's first tell the audience what that is if they're not familiar, and launch into that with a little bit. I still have a bunch of questions, and we're down to less than 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So.
So what's the question?
So first, tell our audience what the anti-magazine bill is.
Well, it's not an anti-magazine bill. It's a magazine capacity bill.
Right,
So it limits the magazine capacity
To 10.
for a semi-automatic weapon to 10.
To 10, yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So
So I was a co-sponsor of that bill.
How come?
okay. So this is a magazine. Okay, Greg. You go
Okay,
first.
well, I'll just let you know why I
Okay.
co-sponsored that bill. My discussion with law enforcement officials since the time I got elected, and this came up time and time again, led me to believe that in the case of a mass shooter, the opportunity for law enforcement to make their move would be when that assailant was changing out, right? When they were changing clips. They'd run out of a clip, they were adding a new clip. And along the way, many of those law enforcement officials told me, that's our opportunity. If you look at the Gifford shooting in Arizona, that shooter was brought down when he was changing clips.
But with a handgun or a rifle?
It applies to all
So
weapons.
the law in Rhode Island applies to a handgun and a
Yep.
rifle. But tell me about these specific mass shootings. They done with handguns?
Well, they're done
or
with
rifles?
in the case of Giffords, I believe it was a handgun. In the case of Parkland, it was a AR-15. So it's across the board. So that's not banning a weapon. That's limiting the magazine capacity, so that in a situation where it's, let's say, a school shooting or a mall shooting, there is an opportunity to.
But what if someone just had a holster, like a holsters on either side?
Yeah,
you're going to end up with.
They do. They still have to change that magazine out, though. There is a time period where they have to change that magazine.
Right, but if you're carrying 2 loaded weapons or 3 loaded weapons,
Yep.
what's the difference?
Well, I mean, listen, this is mitigating, right? This is not going to stop a mass shooting. It's going to mitigate the effects of that mass shooting.
Okay.
First of all, I'm a believer in the Second Amendment. It's a constitutional issue. It's very important to a lot of Rhode Islanders.
Me too, by the way.
Okay. So this bill, this anti-gun bill, I don't think, I'll speak for myself. Carrying a shotgun in the public, I don't have a problem with that. I think that was okay.
You mean
Well, who
eliminating
carries a
that?
shotgun?
Yeah.
Who carries a loaded shotgun in
Well,
public?
believe it or not, in the 1800s, it was on the books, right?
Or in Michigan.
Yeah. So in Rhode
But in the
Island,
state of Rhode Island,
In Rhode
how
Island-
common is this?
it could be just one person. The bottom line is, I don't have a problem with that. 21 years old or younger to buy a weapon, it is a concern. Personally, I think I could live with that, but the magazine bill, I cannot live with.
So-
because let me explain this.
But-
This is a fifth.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm
Okay, go
sorry.
ahead.
But while
You
we're
want-
just talking about the age to purchase, what does that do to our conservation efforts, right? Because the federal government gives us, what is it? I want to say $4. I could be mistaken on the exact amount for every dollar of ammo and that we sell and gun sales too. So we're going to lose federal dollars
Well, you
if
have
we're
to
not
have a blue card to
selling
even
as
buy
much.
ammo now. So it's it's very strict. So you have to have a blue card. You have
But
to
what's
go
going
through
to happen to that money that we use for conservation?
Well, that's
To
something you have to
build
explain.
baseball.
Who signed
we built
you-
a baseball field, a park.
You're gonna
You're
have
into
to-
baseball. We
yeah.
use some of that funding.
I'm-
Anyway,
I
so
don't-
I'm
I don't
sorry.
think there's-
So
I
we have
don't-
less than 10
but,
minutes too.
To be
Go
honest, I
ahead,
don't think
Pat.
there's been any reduction in the purchase of ammunition or weapons.
Well,
in fact, there's
have
been
you
an
looked at the
increase.
price of ammunition?
No, I understand. Well, the price of anything.
Well, yeah, but I think that was done
Okay.
before this kicks
Okay,
in.
so what were you
It's
gonna say
6
quickly,
months.
'cause I have
so
another question.
technically, this is a 15-round magazine. This is not a high-capacity magazine. However, they incorporated it to a 10 minimum. That is a basic rifle magazine for multiple of weapons that the general public owns and enjoys. Now, technically, I'm going to be a felon next month or two because I have that. It's 15 rounds. It's outrageous that this bill was passed, and it was passed through some parliamentary law in which the committee at 6-6 basically got rid of this. They weren't going to have it. So I'm here defending the Second Amendment people, law-abiding Rhode Islanders I met yesterday, veterans, and they're very upset. So this is why I had to bring this up today, because I have to explain to them that I defend their position on this magazine. I'm hoping that there's a case right now in federal court
In Rhode Island.
that will give a temporary restraining order because the United States Supreme Court, through Judge Clarence Thomas, has already kicked down 4 or 5 cases that resembles the magazine. Technically, what he's basically saying is that is protected with the Second Amendment under the gun law, and the magazine is part of that. So to arbitrarily just do this without waiting for them to make that decision, the General Assembly, I think, made a big mistake here. Unfortunately, it's going to have to run its course through the court system. But if we don't get a restraining order, Greg, you might have to put me in jail.
But I think
don't have that power.
law-abiding gun owners are saying that they're the ones that are unfairly, hurt by the law. So can
Okay,
we
go
move on?
ahead. Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, because I think. Did you want to say anything else?
No, I mean, my position is clear. I don't think it has any relationship to the Secretary of State's office, but my position is clear, and it aligns with the vast majority of Rhode Islanders.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, less than 1% of our population has a concealed carry weapon permit. So not a lot of
And the
people in
United States
Rhode Island
Supreme
are
Court came down basically
walking around
waiving
with
some
guns.
issues that was holding back those permits. You don't need a reason now if you want to have a weapon for protection.
Wait,
You
in
know,
Rhode
I
Island?
don't, but there are many people that out there that want that protection because of crime.
Yeah.
People are really, you walk
Well,
outside.
in the state of Rhode Island, you do have to provide a letter of need.
I'm not sure if
with
that's
your application.
constitutional. Again,
What's
I'm a
that?
constitutionalist. I believe right or wrong. So, whatever decision is out there, I abide by it.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about this bill, Greg, regarding licensed clinical social workers. This act would provide that no applicant for a license as a licensed clinical social worker shall be required to take or pass a standardized written examination prior to August 15, 2025 in order to qualify for the license. This shall sunset and expire on August 15, 2025. This act would take effect upon passage. So this did not get passed. But what does this mean?
It's just a shortage of social workers. So for a brief period of time, you would eliminate the passing of the standardized test, put those people that have completed their education into work because we have such a vast shortage of social workers, and then that would sunset and it would go back to the regular process once that period of time was over.
But what about licensed mental health counselors? What about licensed marriage and family therapists? They too would not be able to take an exam. But I mean, you take the exam once you have completed thousands of hours. For the licensed mental health counselor license, you have to go to grad school, that's 2 years. You have to do 12 units of post-grad education. Part of that is a practicum, actually working, acquiring hours. You need 3,000 hours, and then you have to submit an application to then take the test and pass. So how is that fair? How can someone come out of school without any of that and be expected to provide mental health care to someone? And speaking of mass shootings, right? I mean, we really need to put some time, like time and energy and like effort into like good mental health.
Well, it stems from, in my opinion.
And I got one more thing to say about this.
Okay.
The insurance companies are not going to credential or panel somebody without a license. How are you going to seek reimbursement for services if you're not licensed?
Yeah, I don't have the context of the bill in front of me, so I
Okay,
can't,
but you did sign on it.
I did, but I can't speak intelligently about this now without the bill in front of me.
Okay.
My only suggestion would be that I think, you can't try to roll back issues like using the gun magazine or the assault weapon ban. It stems from, and I have to say it, sometimes Hollywood, the rich fat cats down there who make these movies with tremendous amount of violence, teaching our youngsters that it's okay to kill and shoot and stab and murder, even with video games. Now, I know everything is protected under the First Amendment. There's a lot of guys that I spoke to, they say, before they come to play with the Second Amendment, go to the First Amendment and clean that up and stop the women violence, the domestic violence that's shown on TV, teaching our children that's not the way to go. And then when they grow up to be, unfortunately, these undesirables or mentally deranged human beings who just do these mass shootings. Oh, gee, how did that happen?
Well, because a child is being raised without empathy, and so why does that happen?
Well, how does that happen?
That's a whole other show. That's so many factors going into raising a child, and then having a child with antisocial behaviors.
By being perpetrated on television.
Or glorified, too.
Or glorified.
There's a lot of glorification right now.
I grew up on
we have,
McHale's Navy.
Oh, they're giving me the
like
sign.
That,
they're giving me the sign for, okay. And because I want to make sure that you guys each have a final word. So I'm going to set my little timer. We only have a minute? Yeah. You get 30 seconds. 30 seconds, because I want you guys to be able to speak into the camera,
Sure. I think my life experience and my professional experience has qualified me for this position. I have a record that clearly we've talked about here tonight. Rhode Islanders know who I am. I'm a known commodity. And I believe that those experiences, both professionally and in the General Assembly, put me in a good position to be in this office.
Thanks, Greg. Go.
I just want to thank everybody for watching the show tonight. I think it was a great opportunity to watch two very professional Secretary of State candidates. I want to thank Greg Amore for coming in.
Thank you too, Pat.
And he's a great guy. And I think all the situation here is different of opinion and different philosophy of how to run certain things. And I'd like to have your vote. And Rhode Island's a great place, and we want to keep it that way, and we want to keep it and make it better. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm Darlene DeRezzo. This is State of the State. Please find us on social media. We have a brand new Instagram account @StateOfTheStateRI. You can also find us on Vimeo, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter.